The house was small, but it was once full of laughter. Every evening, the smell of simple home-cooked food filled the air. The father would return from work tired but smiling, placing his worn-out shoes by the door. The mother would wipe her hands on her apron and ask about his day. The children would gather around a small wooden table, talking all at once about school, friends, and dreams. They did not have much money, but they had peace, and for a long time that felt like enough. The father worked at a local factory that made metal parts. It was not an easy job. His hands were rough, and his back often hurt. Still, he never complained. He believed hard work would protect his family from any storm. The mother stayed home most days, taking care of the children and managing every coin carefully. She knew exactly how much rice was left in the jar and how long a bottle of cooking oil would last. Life was simple. Birthdays were celebrated with homemade cake. New clothes came only once a year, during special holidays. The children sometimes wished for more, especially when they saw their classmates with shiny shoes or new bags. But when they returned home and saw their parents smiling at them, those wishes felt smaller. Then one morning, everything changed. The father came home earlier than usual. It was still bright outside. The children were surprised to see him standing quietly near the door, not moving, not speaking. His lunchbox was still full in his hand. The factory had shut down. At first, it did not seem real. The managers had gathered everyone and explained that the company was closing due to heavy losses. There would be no more salaries, no notice, no warning. The father tried to stay calm when he told his wife. He said it was temporary. He said he would find something else soon. He had always been strong. He believed strength would solve this too. The first few weeks passed slowly. He woke up early every day, dressed neatly, and went out to search for work. He visited construction sites, warehouses, small workshops. He stood in long lines with other men who were also looking for jobs. Each evening, he returned home with tired eyes and empty hands. The mother tried to stay positive. She sold a few gold bangles she had saved for emergencies. She told the children not to worry. She cooked smaller portions but served them with the same loving smile. But months passed and nothing improved. The savings disappeared faster than anyone expected. Bills started piling up on the table. The landlord began knocking more often. The electricity was cut off one night without warning. The house felt colder and darker than ever before. The children began to notice the tension. The father, who once laughed easily, now sat silently in the corner, staring at the floor. The mother worked longer hours, taking in laundry from neighbors to earn a little money. She stayed up late, sewing clothes for others. Small arguments started to happen. It began with simple things: money for groceries, unpaid school fees, the rising rent. The father felt ashamed each time the topic came up. He believed he had failed. The mother did not mean to blame him, but fear made her voice sharper than she intended. One evening, the oldest child asked for money for a school trip. It was not much, but it was more than they had at that moment. The father looked down and said nothing. The mother gently explained they could not afford it. The child nodded, pretending to understand, but later that night cried quietly into the pillow. Slowly, the house that once felt warm began to feel heavy. The younger children stopped asking for small treats. They stopped inviting friends over. They sensed something was wrong, but did not fully understand what. The father's job search became more desperate. He accepted small daily labor jobs when he could find them. Some days he earned a little. Other days he earned nothing. The uncertainty was worse than the poverty itself. He began avoiding neighbors. He felt embarrassed walking past people who knew he no longer had steady work. The shame grew inside him like a shadow he could not escape. The mother grew exhausted. She tried to stretch every coin, but it was never enough. She worried about school fees, about food, about rent. At night, when everyone was asleep, she allowed herself to cry quietly. The oldest child began spending more time outside, not because of bad company, but because being at home felt too painful. The silence during dinner felt louder than any argument. Sometimes the child wished things would go back to how they were, even if that meant fewer toys or smaller meals. One day, the landlord came with a serious face. He said he had waited long enough. If the rent was not paid soon, they would have to leave. That night, the argument was worse than ever before. The father felt cornered. The mother felt helpless. Words were spoken in anger that neither truly meant. The children listened from the next room, holding their breath. For the first time, the father raised his voice loudly, not in cruelty, but in frustration. He said he was trying his best. He said he was tired of feeling useless. The mother responded with tears in her eyes, saying she was tired too, tired of pretending everything was fine, tired of watching the children suffer. Silence followed, a long, painful silence. The next morning, the father left early again, but this time, something felt different. He did not return at his usual time. Evening came, then night. The mother tried calling him, but his phone was off. The children sat near the door, waiting. Every sound outside made them look up with hope. He finally came back late at night. His face looked older, as if years had passed in one day. He sat down and spoke softly. He said he had found temporary work in another city. It was not permanent, but it paid better than the small jobs here. He said he needed to leave for a while. The room went quiet. The children stared at him, not fully understanding. The mother asked how long. He said he did not know. He explained that it was the only way to clear the debts and pay the rent. He promised to send money home. He promised it was only temporary. But promises do not always calm fear. The youngest child started crying. The older ones looked away, trying to be strong. The mother nodded slowly, even though her heart felt like it was breaking. A few days later, he packed a small bag. There was not much to take. Before leaving, he hugged each child tightly. He told them to study hard and listen to their mother. He told his wife to stay strong. When the door closed behind him, the house felt emptier than ever before. Days turned into weeks. The father called when he could. The signal was often weak. He sounded tired but tried to sound hopeful. He said work was hard but manageable. The mother now carried everything on her shoulders. She woke up before sunrise and returned home after dark. The children helped with chores more than before. They tried not to complain, but the distance began to grow. Phone calls became shorter. Sometimes money arrived late. Sometimes it did not arrive at all because the work was not steady. The oldest child began feeling anger instead of sadness. It felt like abandonment. The younger ones missed their father's presence deeply. The mother tried to defend him, saying he was doing this for them. But even she felt lonely. Poverty had not just taken their comfort, it had taken their unity. It had turned love into stress and silence into misunderstanding. One evening, as the mother sat alone at the table looking at unpaid bills, she realized something painful. They were no longer functioning as a team. Each person was carrying their pain separately. The children were growing up faster than they should. The father was fighting his battles alone in another city, and she was standing in the middle, trying to hold broken pieces together. The small house, once filled with laughter, now echoed with quiet footsteps and unspoken worries. None of them knew that this was only the beginning of a much deeper test. None of them knew that something hidden in the past would one day change everything. But for now, all they could feel was the weight of poverty, heavy, silent, and slowly pulling them further apart. The father arrived in the new city with a small bag and a heart full of pressure. The city was louder than his hometown. Cars moved fast. People walked quickly, and no one seemed to notice anyone else. He felt invisible, like just another tired man standing on a crowded street corner. The temporary job he had found was at a construction site. The pay was better than the small daily labor he used to get back home, but the work was harder. He carried heavy bricks, mixed cement under the hot sun, and climbed tall scaffolding with shaky legs. At night, his body ached so much that he could barely sleep. He rented a small shared room with 3 other workers. The room had thin walls and one small window. There was no privacy. Sometimes he lay awake listening to the sound of traffic outside and wondered how his life had changed so quickly. He missed his family deeply, but he did not say it during phone calls. When he called home, he tried to sound strong. He asked about the children's studies. He told them to listen to their mother. He said everything would be fine soon. But after hanging up, He often stared at his phone for a long time. He wanted to say more. He wanted to admit that he felt lonely and scared. Yet he believed a father should not show weakness. Back home, life was not easy either. The mother had adjusted to her new routine. She woke up before sunrise, prepared simple breakfast for children, and then left for work. She cleaned houses during the day and stitched clothes at night. Her hands were always busy, but her mind was full of worry. She tried to keep the house running smoothly. She forced herself to smile in front of the children, even when her back hurt from exhaustion. She did not want them to feel the full weight of their situation. The oldest child had changed the most. Once cheerful and talkative, now there was a quiet anger growing inside. It felt unfair that friends had both parents at home while this family had to live divided. School became less important. Thoughts about helping with money became stronger. One afternoon, the oldest child skipped school and went looking for work at a local workshop. The pay was small, but it felt better than doing nothing. When the mother found out, she was upset. She wanted her child to focus on education, not carry adult responsibilities. An argument followed. The child said someone had to step up. The mother said it was not the child's job to fix adult problems. Both were speaking from pain, not anger. The younger children watched quietly from the corner of the room. They did not fully understand money or rent, but they understood tension. They understood that something inside the family was slowly cracking. Weeks turned into months. The father's job in the city was not stable. Some days a construction site closed due to lack of materials. Some weeks payments were delayed. He sent money home whenever he could, but it was never enough to fully relax. There were nights when he skipped dinner to save a few extra coins. He told his family he had already eaten. He did not want them to worry. Back home, the landlord continued to remind them about overdue rent. The mother tried to negotiate. She promised that her husband would send more soon. She believed him because she needed to believe him. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. The father felt ashamed when he could not send enough money. The mother felt disappointed but tried not to show it. Small misunderstandings grew larger because they were happening over weak phone signals and tired voices. One evening, during a call, the line kept cutting off. The father thought he heard his wife say that the children were struggling in school. He misunderstood her tone as blame. His voice became defensive. She felt hurt by his response. The call ended suddenly. Both sat in silence afterward, each believing the other did not understand. Distance does strange things to people. It turns simple conversations into heavy moments. It makes silence feel louder. The oldest child began working part-time more often, despite the mother's objections. The extra money helped with groceries. But school grades started to drop. Teachers noticed a change. One of them called the mother for a meeting. She explained the situation with tired honesty. The teacher listened with sympathy, but reminded her that education was important for breaking the cycle of poverty. That sentence stayed in her mind, breaking the cycle. She wondered if they were stuck in a circle they could not escape. Meanwhile, in the city, the father met many other men in similar situations. During lunch breaks, they shared stories. Some had not seen their families in years. Some had children who barely recognized them anymore. Those stories frightened him. He did not want to become a stranger to his own children. One night, after a long day of work, he took out an old folded paper from his bag. It was something he had kept hidden for years. He stared at it quietly, as if it carried both hope and fear. He had never told his family about it. At the time, he believed it was too small to mention. Now, in his lowest moments, it felt like the only light left, but he was not ready to speak about it yet. Back home, tension reached another peak when electricity was cut again. The children tried to finish homework under a small candle. The room felt hot and suffocating. The oldest child suddenly said, "What's the point of studying in the dark?" The words hurt more than intended. The mother felt tears fill her eyes, but she quickly turned away so no one would see. She felt like she was failing as a parent. She felt alone, even though her children were sitting right beside her. That night, she made a difficult decision. She called her husband and told him honestly how bad things had become. Not to blame him, but because she could not carry it alone anymore. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. For the first time, the father did not try to sound strong. He admitted he was struggling too. He admitted he was tired of pretending everything was under control. They both cried quietly, miles apart. It was the first honest conversation they had in months. After that call, something shifted slightly, not in their financial situation, but in their hearts. They realized that hiding pain from each other was only making things worse. Still, problems did not disappear overnight. The construction company announced that the current project would end soon. Workers would either be transferred or let go. The father did not know which category he would fall into. Fear returned. He began thinking deeply about the folded paper in his bag again. He remembered why he had kept it secret. He remembered the day he made that small decision years ago, thinking it was nothing important. Now it might mean everything. Back home, the children had started living almost separate emotional lives. The oldest carried anger. The middle child carried confusion. The youngest carried silent sadness. The house felt like a waiting room, where everyone was waiting for something to change but did not know what. The mother often looked at old family photos. In those pictures, they were standing close together, smiling naturally. She wondered if that closeness could ever return. Poverty had not only reduced their income, it had reduced their conversations, their laughter, their warmth. One evening, the father called with an unusual tone in his voice. He sounded serious but calm. He said he needed to come home for a few days. The mother was surprised. They could barely afford travel expenses. She asked if everything was okay. He paused before answering. He said there was something important he needed to discuss in person. Something he should have shared a long time ago. Her heart began to race with questions. Was he losing his job? Was there more bad news? Or was it something else? She did not know that this hidden truth had been quietly waiting in the background for years. And she did not know that this truth, once revealed, would slowly begin to bring back the family that poverty had almost destroyed. When he said he was coming home, no one knew what to expect. The mother felt nervous from the moment she ended the call. His voice had sounded different. Not tired, not defeated, just serious. She kept thinking about the way he paused before speaking, as if he was carrying something heavy inside him. The children reacted in different ways. The youngest became excited and asked if their father would bring sweets. The middle child smiled quietly but did not say much. The oldest simply nodded and walked away, trying not to show emotion. The truth was, all of them had missed him more than they were willing to admit. 2 days later, he stood at the door again. He looked thinner than before. His face had deeper lines, and his hands were rougher, but his eyes were steady. When the door opened, there was an awkward silence for a second. Then the youngest ran forward and hugged him tightly. He held the child for a long moment, as if trying to make up for lost time. Inside the house, nothing had changed. The same small table, the same old sofa, the same quiet air. But something felt different. It felt like a moment before a storm, or maybe before a sunrise. That evening, after a simple dinner, he asked everyone to sit together. The children looked at each other. The mother felt her heartbeat quicken. She wiped her hands on her dress and sat down across from him. He reached into a small bag and pulled out an old folded paper. It was slightly worn at the edges, as if it had been opened and closed many times. He placed it on the table, but did not speak immediately. Years ago, before the factory closed, he had quietly bought a small piece of land on the edge of town. It was not expensive at the time. In fact, most people thought it was a useless piece of dry ground far from everything. He had not told anyone. At that time, he had wanted it to be a surprise. He had imagined building a small house there one day, a place that truly belonged to them. No landlord, no rent, just their own roof. But life became busy. Expenses grew. The land remained just a piece of paper stored away in a drawer. When he lost his job, he remembered it. He tried to sell it quietly, hoping to solve their problems quickly, but no one wanted it. Buyers said it was too far from the city, too empty, too risky. So he kept a secret. He did not tell his wife because he did not want to give false hope. He did not tell the children because he did not want them to depend on something uncertain. But a few weeks ago, something unexpected happened. The government announced a new highway project. The road would connect the main city to nearby towns. And according to map, that highway would pass very close to his land. At first, he did not believe it. He visited the local office in the city where he was working. He checked the documents again and again. It was true. The land that no one wanted was now in a prime location. Within days, property dealers began searching for landowners in that area. Prices started rising quickly. One agent contacted him after seeing his name on old records. The offer they made was more money than he had ever held in his hands at once. As he explained this, the room became completely silent. The children stared at the paper on the table as if it were something magical. The mother felt a mix of shock and confusion. She did not know whether to feel happy or hurt. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked softly. He lowered his eyes. He admitted he had been afraid that if the land never became valuable, they would feel even more disappointed, afraid that if he mentioned it during their hardest days, it would sound like an excuse instead of a solution. He said he carried the paper with him to the city because it reminded him that he had once tried to build something for the family's future. It gave him strength on days when everything else felt lost. The oldest child finally spoke. There was frustration in the voice. "We were struggling so much. We could have sold it earlier." He nodded slowly. He had asked himself the same question many nights. But earlier, it would not have sold for much. Maybe just enough to cover a few months of rent. Now it could clear all their debts and still leave enough for something bigger. Education, savings, maybe even that small house he once dreamed about. The mother sat quietly, thinking about the past months, the sleepless nights, the tears hidden from the children, the arguments filled with stress. Part of her wished she had known. Part of her understood why he had stayed silent. He reached across the table and said something simple but honest. "I was wrong to carry this alone." That sentence changed the mood in the room. For so long, each of them had been carrying their own pain alone. The father carried shame. The mother carried fear. The oldest carried anger. The younger ones carried confusion. Now, the secret was no longer hidden. He explained that he had not finalized any deal yet. He wanted the family to decide together. Sell it now? Wait longer? Invest in something else? For the first time in months, they were not talking about unpaid bills. They were talking about choices. The youngest child asked if this meant they would not have to move again. The father smiled gently and said that was the goal. The middle child asked if school fees would be paid on time. The mother quickly nodded, tears forming in her eyes. The oldest remained quiet for a while, then finally said, "So this means we can start again?" The father looked at each of them carefully. "Yes," he said, "but only if we do it together." That night, no one slept easily, but it was not because of fear. It was because their minds were full of new thoughts. Hope felt unfamiliar after so many months of worry. The next morning, the father took his wife to see the land. It had been years since she last visited it. They stood on the dry ground, looking around at the empty space. In the distance, machines were already working on clearing paths for the future highway. Dust rose into the air. The sound of engines echoed. She tried to imagine what this place would look like once the road was completed. Shops, houses, movement, life. She turned to him and said quietly, "You really bought this for us?" He nodded. She realized that even during their stable days, he had been thinking about their future. He just never spoke about it loudly. Back at home, the children were talking more than they had in months. They were making small plans. The oldest mentioned returning to school fully. The younger ones talked about painting their own room someday. The house still had unpaid bills. The landlord still expected rent. Nothing had officially changed yet, but something inside the family had shifted. They were no longer standing on separate islands of pain. The secret, which once felt like a wall between them, was now becoming a bridge. Poverty had pushed them apart slowly through stress and silence. But this hidden piece of land, this quiet decision made years ago, was now giving them a chance to rebuild not just their finances, but their trust. And for the first time in a long while, they sat together at dinner not with heavy hearts, but with cautious hope. The road outside their lives was still under construction, but so was their family. And this time, They were building it side by side. The days after the secret came out felt different. The house was still small. The paint was still fading from the walls. The unpaid bills were still stacked in one corner of the table. But the air inside the home had changed. It no longer felt heavy with silence. It felt like something was slowly opening. The father stayed for a few more days to sort out the paperwork. Property agents began calling again. This time, he did not answer alone. He put the phone on speaker and let his wife sit beside him. They listened together. They asked questions together. For the first time in a long while, decisions were not made in isolation. One agent offered a price that sounded unreal. The mother looked at her husband, searching his face to see if this was truly happening. He looked calm but careful. He had learned a hard lesson about rushing under pressure. They decided to wait a little longer and speak to two more agents. The oldest child surprised them by suggesting they compare written offers instead of trusting verbal promises. That small suggestion made the father smile. It reminded him that even during difficult times, his children had been growing stronger. At night, after the children went to sleep, the couple talked quietly, not about fear this time, but about plans. They discussed clearing debts first, then paying school fees for the entire year in advance. They talked about setting aside some savings. They even dared to talk about buying a modest home, so they would never face another landlord's knock again. But along with hope, there were still wounds that had not fully healed. One evening, the oldest child finally spoke openly. The words had been sitting inside for months. "When you left," the voice trembled slightly, "it felt like you chose work over us." The room went silent. The father did not defend himself immediately. He did not raise his voice. He simply listened. He explained that leaving was the hardest decision he had ever made. He thought distance would protect the family from worse hardship. He believed earning money elsewhere was his only option. But he admitted something he had never said before. "I didn't realize that by trying to protect you from poverty, I was hurting you in another way." Those words broke something open. The oldest child's eyes filled with tears. Anger had been easier to carry than sadness. Now sadness came rushing forward. The younger children also moved closer, as if they needed to physically feel that their father was truly there. The mother placed her hand on the table and said something simple but powerful. "We all made mistakes. We all tried to be strong alone." It was not a dramatic moment. There was no shouting, just quiet understanding. Sometimes healing does not come through loud apologies. It comes through honest sentences spoken softly. A few days later, they received the final written offer. It was higher than expected. The highway project was moving faster, and investors wanted secure land before prices rose even more. The father held the paper in his hands and felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, regret for not sharing sooner, pride for having once believed in that small piece of land. He asked the family one more time if they were sure about selling. The mother nodded. The children agreed. They understood that this was not just about money. It was about a fresh start. When the sale was finalized, the amount transferred into his account felt unreal. For a few minutes, he just stared at the numbers on the screen. He remembered the nights he skipped meals, the days he stood in long lines for work, the shame he carried silently. He did not celebrate alone. He came home with sweets that evening, not expensive ones, just simple treats. The children laughed as they shared them around the table. It was the first time in months that laughter filled the room naturally. The very next morning, they began clearing debts. The landlord was paid fully. The look of surprise on his face was almost satisfying, but the father felt no desire for revenge or pride. He only felt relief. School fees were paid. The electricity bill was settled. Small but heavy burdens disappeared one by one. Yet something important happened that week. The father made a decision not to return permanently to the distant city. Instead of chasing higher income elsewhere, he chose to find steady work closer to home. It might pay less than what he could earn in a big city, but it would allow him to sit at the dinner table every night. When he told the family this, the youngest child smiled widely. The oldest simply said, "That matters more." They began searching for a modest house to buy. Nothing fancy, Just a place with solid walls, enough space for each child to have a small corner of their own. After visiting several options, they found one slightly outside the busy center town. It needed small repairs, but it felt right, standing inside the empty living room. The mother imagined placing a table near the window. The children ran from room to room, already choosing which corner might hold their books or beds. The father stood quietly for a moment. Years ago, he had dreamed of building a house on that dry land. Life had taken a different path, but in a way, that dream was still coming true. They purchased the house. Moving day was simple but meaningful. They carried their few belongings carefully, as if each item held a piece of their past struggle. Neighbors watched with curiosity, unaware of the story behind this change. That first evening in the new home, they sat on the floor and shared a simple meal. The walls were bare. The rooms echoed slightly, but it felt like a beginning. Later that night, when the children were asleep in their new rooms, the couple sat together quietly. "Do you think this would have happened if we never went through those hard months?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment. "Maybe not," he replied. "We would still be comfortable, but we wouldn't understand each other the way we do now." They both knew poverty had shaken them deeply. It had exposed fears, pride, and silence. It had nearly torn them apart, but it had also forced them to see what truly mattered. The next few weeks were not perfect. Adjusting to normal life again felt strange. The oldest returned to school fully, but had to catch up on missed lessons. The mother reduced her workload, but still struggled to rest properly because she was used to constant pressure. The father found work at a local workshop. It was not glamorous, but he came home every evening covered in dust and smiling. The biggest change was not financial. It was emotional. They started having weekly family talks. No phones, no distractions, just honest conversations. If someone felt stressed, they said it out loud. If someone felt hurt, they spoke gently instead of hiding it. The secret that once created distance had now created closeness. One evening, while sitting together in their new living room, the oldest said something thoughtful. "We thought poverty broke us, but it was silence that almost did." Everyone nodded. The father looked around at his family, really looked at them, and realized that the land had never been the true blessing. The real blessing was this second chance. A second chance to listen. A second chance to forgive. A second chance to build a home, not just with money, but with trust. The road outside the town was still under construction, machines moving slowly day by day. Just like that highway, their family had been under construction too. And now, instead of cracks growing wider, they were finally building something strong enough to last. Life did not turn perfect overnight. The new house had strong walls and a clean roof, but still needed small repairs. One window would not close properly. The kitchen tap leaked a little. The paint was plain and dull. Yet every small flaw felt like something they could fix together, not something that would break them. For the first few weeks, they moved slowly, almost carefully, as if afraid that happiness might disappear if they celebrated too loudly. Poverty had trained them to expect sudden bad news. Even with money in the bank and debts cleared, that fear did not vanish in one day. The father continued working at the local workshop. The pay was modest, but he came home every evening before sunset. The children got used to hearing the sound of his footsteps at the door again. That simple sound became a comfort. He no longer tried to carry everything alone. If work was stressful, he spoke about it at dinner. If he felt tired, he admitted it. He had learned that silence creates distance faster than poverty ever could. The mother slowly reduced the extra sewing job she had taken during the hardest months. At first, she felt guilty resting. Her body had grown used to constant movement and worry. Sitting down in the afternoon felt strange, but the children encouraged her. They reminded her that she had carried them through the darkest days. One afternoon, she stood in the small backyard of the new house and planted a few flowers. It was a simple act, but it meant something deep. During the months of struggle, there had been no space for beauty. Now, she wanted the home to feel alive, not just functional. The oldest returned fully to school. Catching up was not easy. There were lessons missed, chapters skipped, and confidence shaken. Some classmates had moved ahead. But this time, there was no anger at home pushing the child away from books. There was support. In the evenings, the father sat beside the dining table, helping with homework. Sometimes he did not fully understand the new lessons, but he tried. They learned together. And in that shared effort, the old tension slowly disappeared. The younger children also changed. They laughed more freely now. They invited friends over without embarrassment. They no longer felt the need to hide their struggles because those struggles were no longer defining them. One evening, during their weekly family talk, the father brought up something unexpected. "I don't want us to forget what we went through," he said calmly. The children looked confused. Why remember pain when life was finally better? He explained that forgetting would be easy, but remembering would make them stronger. Poverty had taught them the value of honesty, teamwork, and patience. If they pretended it never happened, they might slowly return to silence and pride. The mother agreed. She said the hardest days showed them who they truly were, not just as individuals, but as a family. So they created a small tradition. Once a month, they would sit together and talk openly about their goals, fears, and gratitude. Not just about money, but about emotions. If someone felt distant, they would say it. If someone felt pressure at school or work, they would share it. It felt awkward at first, but slowly it became natural. Months passed. The highway near the old piece of land was finally completed. Traffic began moving quickly along that road. Shops opened nearby. That empty, dry area turned into a busy place full of life. Sometimes, the father would drive past it on his way back from work. He would slow down for a moment and look at the space where his small dream had once quietly waited. He did not feel regret for selling it. Instead, he felt thankful. That land had served its purpose. It had been a hidden seed planted years ago, and when the time was right, it grew into something that saved them. Back at home, small improvements continued. They painted the living room together one weekend. The children chose light colors to make the space feel bigger. Laughter echoed as paint accidentally ended up on hands and clothes. The house was no longer just a structure. It was a symbol of a second chance. One night, the oldest asked a serious question during dinner. If we ever face hard times again, what will we do differently? The room went quiet, but not in a heavy way. The father answered first. We will not separate. The mother added, we will not hide our worries. The children nodded. They had learned that problems grow larger in silence. There was one more important change in the family. They began helping others quietly. When they heard about a neighbor struggling with school fees, they contributed a small amount anonymously. When a former coworker of the father lost his job, he helped him find temporary work at the workshop. They did not do it to show off. They did it because they understood how loneliness feels during financial hardship. Helping others reminded them that they were no longer powerless. As time went on, the anger that once lived in the oldest child completely faded. In its place came maturity. The experience had shaped a stronger mindset. Education became more important than ever, not just as a path to success, but as a way to avoid repeating the same cycle. The younger children carried different lessons. They learned gratitude early in life. They understood that comfort is not guaranteed, and that family unity matters more than material things. One evening, nearly a year after the secret had been revealed, the family sat outside in the small backyard. The flowers the mother planted were blooming gently. The air was calm. They spoke about the past without fear. They remembered the candlelit nights when electricity was cut. They remembered the arguments filled with stress. They remembered the loneliness of distance. But now, those memories did not hurt in the same way. They felt like chapters of a story that had already been survived. The father looked at his family and said something from the heart. I thought money would fix everything, but it only opened the door. What really fixed us was choosing to stay together. No one argued with that. The secret had brought opportunity. Yes, it had cleared debts and bought a house. But the true turning point had been honesty. The moment he placed that old paper on the table and admitted he should not have carried it alone. If he had continued hiding it, resentment might have grown. If the family had refused to forgive, the money might have solved financial problems, but not emotional ones. Instead, they chose something harder, understanding. Years later, When people asked how they managed to recover from such deep hardship, they did not speak proudly about selling land at the perfect time. They spoke about conversations at the dinner table. They spoke about tears shared honestly. They spoke about learning that strength does not mean silence. Poverty had once torn them apart piece by piece. It had exposed fear, pride, and misunderstanding. But a secret, once revealed with humility, became the thread that stitched them back together. The new house stood quietly under the evening sky. It was not grand or luxurious, but inside it lived something far more valuable than wealth: trust. And that trust was stronger than any storm they might face in the future.